Hey Planeswalkers, this is Eric again from Bane Alley Magic, bringing you another Commander Deck Tech video, and today we're talking about another spoiler from the up-and-coming War of the Spark set, Ilharg, the Raze Boar. But before we do, a quick reminder, if you like this video and you hit that like button or that subscribe button, that would be ill. So Ilharg is 3 and 2 red for a 6/6 legendary boar god with trample. And whenever Ilharg the Raze Boar attacks, you may put a creature card from your hand onto the battlefield tapped and attacking. Return that creature to your hand at the beginning of the next end step. When Ilharg the Raze Boar dies or is put into exile from the battlefield, you may put it into its owner's library, third from the top. So first off, I'd like to clarify that I pronounce it Ilharg, not Ilharg, come on. Next, a 6/6 trample for 5 mana is just a good deal. And then finally, we have Ilharg's triggered abilities. The first is similar to cards like Kaalia of the Vast, or Champion of Ronus and Elvish Piper, but it appears to have the drawback of returning the creature to our hand at the beginning of the next end step, similar to Nahiri the Harbinger's ultimate ability. However, the drawback is not really a drawback. First off, unlike Elvish Piper or Champion of Ronus, we did not have to pay any mana or exert our creature to get the effect, so we are basically getting this ability for free. So the drawback is not really a drawback as much as it is a restraint, keeping the ability from being totally busted. Kaalia also gets out creatures onto the battlefield for free, but having only 2 toughness, she is also really easy to kill, and her restrictive mana cost of, white, red, and black means that often we will not be casting her on turn 4, and she can also only cheat out 3 specific creature types. Yeah, whatever. She's totally busted. Anyway, get over it. Yeah, but anyway, Ilharg can be totally busted too. He gets any creature we want onto the battlefield tapped and attacking, and he is tough enough to live through some battles. Now, before we move on to Ilharg's death trigger, let's get some rules clarification out of the way for those who are wondering. So let's say we use Ilharg to bring out something like Aki Lava Runner. So when Aki Lava Runner deals damage to an opponent, it flips into Tok Tok Volcanoborn. Even though the creature is transformed into something else, the creature remained on the battlefield, so it is technically the same permanent. It will therefore still return to our hand at the end of the turn. Same thing with werewolves and things like that. However, once the creature has been brought out with Ilharg, if it leaves the battlefield and returns, it is technically considered to be a new permanent and will not need to return to our hand. So let's use the meld mechanic as an example. So let's say we control Hanweir Battlements and we use Ilharg to get Hanweir Garrison onto the battlefield, and then we meld the Garrison and the Battlements into Hanweir the Writhing Township. Because the Garrison and the Battlements were first exiled with the meld mechanic, Hanweir the Rising Township will not need to return to our hand at the end of the turn. Same thing with something like, Chandra, Fire of Kaladesh. She has to get exiled to transform into the Planeswalker, so she would not have to return to our hand. When we combine Ilharg's attack trigger with something like Enter the Battlefield effects, the synergy really pops off. Suddenly the drawback becomes an advantage of repeating Enter the Battlefield triggers. Finally, let's talk about Ilharg's death trigger. Basically, it's always going to be a risk, as you never know when someone is going to force you to shuffle your library, but the risk is still very tempting. Being able to cast your commander again from your hand is no joke. So if you are faced with this dilemma, here's my advice. If you have enemies at the table and you don't have the ability to draw Ilharg on your next turn, don't do it. The risk is too great. But thankfully, worst case scenario, we can win without Ilharg because our deck is running some pretty amazing creatures. So let's get into the deck, starting with the 2 cards that I think are really the all-stars. And those are Warstorm Surge and Conjurer's Closet. So, Warstorm Surge is 5 and a red for an enchantment that says, whenever a creature enters the battlefield under your control, it deals damage equal to its power to any target. So, every single time you're cheating something out with Larg, you're just dealing tons of damage with Warstorm Surge. If you haven't seen this card yet, it goes in a lot of decks, but definitely works really well in decks that can cheat out creatures for free, because we're almost always cheating out huge creatures, and therefore Warstorm Surge is just going to be dealing tons of damage throughout the game if we can get it out. And the next card is probably the all-time all-star of the whole deck, Conjurer's Closet. 5 mana for an artifact that says, at the beginning of your end step, you may exile target creature you control, then return that card to the battlefield under your control. Just like we said before, if the creature leaves the battlefield and returns, it's considered a new permanent. So basically, with the combination of Conjurer's Closet and Larg, you get out any creature from your hand for free, and it remains on the battlefield. And that is pretty amazing, and not something to be scoffed at. I think it's a really great synergy. So yeah, I definitely think Conjurer's Closet is just a must-have in any Larg deck. You know, just being able to guarantee that creature remains on the battlefield, any creature you want. Oh man, that's great. So, let's move on into the creatures, going by converted mana cost as usual, starting with Varchild, Betrayer of Keldor. For 2 and a red, you get a 3/3 human knight, and whenever Varchild, Betrayer of Keldor, deals combat damage to a player, that player creates that many 1/1 red survivor creature tokens. Survivors your opponents control can't block, and they can't attack you or a planeswalker you control. When Varchild leaves the battlefield, gain control of all survivors. Yeah, this card is really awesome in this deck. Such a cool card with Larg the Raze Boar, because you are just totally getting those survivor tokens immediately, because Varchild is going back to your hand, and you're just gaining control of all the survivors again and again. It's just, for 3 mana, you basically get 3 1/1 red tokens and 3 damage in. I mean, that's huge. Actually, not even paying 3 mana at all. Just every turn, you have the choice of getting 3 1/1 creature tokens in, as long as Varchild can deal damage to someone. So I think Varchild is really great with Larg. Just, you know, a repeatable way to continually get tokens. And, you know, all by herself, you know, Varchild is really great just to have on the battlefield. Even if you just cast it, you can end up getting a ton of survivor tokens out of it. Next, we have Captain Lannery Storm, 2 and a red for a 2/2 human pirate with haste. And whenever Captain Lannery Storm attacks, create a colorless treasure artifact token with tap and sacrifice this artifact to add 1 mana of any color to your mana pool. And whenever you sacrifice a treasure, Captain Lannery Storm gets +1/+0 till the end of the turn. So what I love about Lannery Storm is that she's really not threatening enough for your opponents to really want to like blow some of their removal on her, and she's almost always going to end up getting you a few tokens every game you play her. I mean, you know, of course somebody could kill her right away, but I mean, she does have haste, so she almost always, you know, pays for herself and gets you 1 token. But again, you know, are your opponents really gonna, you know, blow that removal spell just to get rid of your 2/2 with haste in Commander? You know, maybe, but I think that's, you know, yeah, that's pretty big waste of a removal spell. So I think, you know, she does work. For 3 mana, she ends up getting you some tokens, and she's a nice little body, so I think she does pretty well in the deck. Next, we have Purphoros, God of the Forge, 3 and a red for a 6/5 legendary enchantment creature god with indestructible. As long as your devotion to red is less than 5, Purphoros isn't a creature. And whenever another creature enters the battlefield under your control, Purphoros deals 2 damage to each opponent, and for 2 and a red, creatures you control get +1/+0 until the end of the turn. So if you don't already know, devotion refers to the mana symbols of the permanents you control. So if you controlled Purphoros and Larg at the same time, your devotion to red will be 3 at that time, because they have, you know, 3 red mana symbols in their mana costs. Anyway, Purphoros just is huge at ending commander games. Really great with any kind of commander deck that has any sort of enter the battlefield effects, you know, which this does have a few of them, but more than having enter the battlefield synergies, it just has a lot of creatures entering the battlefield, you know. So this is something that just really synergizes great, just like with Warstorm Surge, you know. Perforos is just going to be killing our opponents. It's also going to be making some enemies, but thankfully we got ways to deal with that, such as having our giant 6/6 trampler. Next we have Solemn Simulacrum, 4 mana for a 2/2 artifact golem. When Solemn Simulacrum enters the battlefield, you may search your library for a basic land card, put that card onto the battlefield tapped, and then shuffle your library. When Solemn Simulacrum dies, you may draw a card. So this is really great with Larg if you want to just have a repeatable way to get basic land cards onto the battlefield. But once you have them onto the battlefield for good, you can have them die, and then you can draw a card. Obviously a great card for any commander deck. You know, not all commander decks, but I mean, really could go in any commander deck. Definitely any commander deck that has enter the battlefield or death triggers. Next we have Neheb Dreadhorde Champion, 2 and 2 red for a 5/4 zombie Minotaur warrior with trample. Whenever Neheb Dreadhorde Champion deals combat damage to a player or planeswalker, you may discard any number of cards. If you do, draw that many cards and add that much red mana to your mana pool. Until the end of the turn, you don't lose this mana as steps and phases end. So Neheb is another card that was recently spoiled from the up-and-coming War of the Spark set, and I think it is really fabulous, really cool card. Obviously another great commander choice, and really pays homage to the older Neheb card from the Amonkhet set. I think it's great at ramping you and drawing you cards. Yeah, just a great card in general. But also, you know, with any of these creatures, the idea is, you know, to kind of surprise them out. If you've ever played with like a Kalia of the Vast deck, it's always great. You're like, I go to combat with Larg, and everybody's like, oh boy, what's he gonna bring out? You know, and so you have all these choices, and one of the spookiest, I think, would be Fanatic of Mogus, 3 and a red for a 4/2 Minotaur Shaman. And when Fanatic of Mogus enters the battlefield, it deals damage to each opponent equal to your devotion to red. And so that could be a huge amount of damage. I mean, let's just say we had these 3 creatures on the battlefield. When Fanatic of Mogus enters the battlefield, he's going to be dealing 5 damage to each opponent. That's a ton of damage. But again, with Ilharg, the Raze Boar's ability, you're going to be returning him to your hand, and you're going to be able to do it again and again and again, and Fanatic of Mogus is just going to be really killing everybody if they can't stop it. Really cool card with this deck, absolutely. Next we have Anger, 3 and a red for an Incarnation, which is a 2/2 with haste, and as long as Anger is in your graveyard and you control a mountain, creatures you control have haste. So this is one of the best way to give your creatures haste in the format of Commander, just because it's in your graveyard, so it's hard for your opponents to deal with unless they can exile your entire graveyard or exile it specifically from your graveyard. You know, it's tough for them to deal with. It's literally impossible for some decks to deal with. And yeah, it's just really easy to have a single mountain and have this in your graveyard. Really great as a discard choice, obviously. Once it's on the battlefield as well, you're all the time you're like, please just kill it, kill Anger so I can have haste, because obviously giving Larg haste is huge. You know, giving Larg haste is one of the most important things we can do, and we have multiple ways to do it in the deck. Next we have Anarchist, 4 and a red for a 2/2 townsfolk, which has been eroded to like human wizard. And when Anarchist comes into play, you may return target sorcery card from your graveyard to your hand. So keep your eyes open for those sorceries. Next, we got Thundermaw Hellkite, 3 and 2 red for a 5/5 dragon with flying and haste. When Thundermaw Hellkite enters the battlefield, it deals 1 damage to each creature with flying your opponent's control and tap those creatures. So this is a way we can continually keep down our opponent's creatures with flying. Basically, we just keep getting Thundermaw Hellkite out, and it keeps tapping down all of those creatures that our opponents have and, preventing them from blocking, which is pretty sweet. Next, we have Stormbreath Dragon, 3 and 2 red for a 4/4 dragon with flying, haste, and protection from white, and has Monstrosity 3, so you can pay 5 and 2 red, and if this creature isn't monstrous, you put 3 +1/+1 counters on it, and it becomes what's considered to be monstrous. And when Stormbreath Dragon becomes monstrous, it deals damage to each opponent equal to the number of cards in that player's hand. Yeah, so one thing we love to do is punish our opponents for having tons of cards in their hand, but also having protection from white is really important because it is one of the more powerful removal colors in the whole set, in the whole game. And Stormbreath Dragon, just in general, even if you can't cheat it out with Larg, just having that haste and flying is really important. And also, I haven't said this yet, but dragons are a big part of this deck because, when you look up giant red creatures to cheat out, what do you choose? You choose giant red dragons. Of course, they're always the biggest, baddest, best giant red creatures that we got. So we do have some dragon synergies in the deck as well, in fact. Next, we got Mindclaw Shaman, 4 and a red for a 2/2 Viashino Shaman. When Mindclaw Shaman enters the battlefield, target opponent reveals his or her hand. You may cast an instant or sorcery card from that player's hand without paying its mana cost. Yes! And with the Larg, again, we get to do this over and over again and just constantly cast instants and sorceries from our opponent's hands. Another one of the really spooky choices that our opponents might be dreading. Next, we have Neheb the Eternal, the old Neheb, 3 and 2 red for a 4/6 zombie Minotaur warrior from I said Amonkhet before, I guess I was wrong. This is from Hour of Devastation. And it has Afflict 3, so whenever this creature becomes blocked, defending player loses 3 life. And at the beginning of your post-combat main phase, add red mana to your mana pool for each 1 life your opponents have lost this turn. So Neheb can add a ton of mana to your mana pool, especially if you have something like Warstorm Surge or Perforos out. This can just add so much mana to your mana pool, and that's one way we can end the game is, pumping that mana into a spell like Comet Storm or something like that. We'll get into that later. But yeah, Neheb is definitely one of the better ramp creatures of mono red. Next, we have Combustible Gearhulk, 4 and 2 red for a 6/6 first strike construct. And when Combustible Gearhulk enters the battlefield, target opponent may have you draw 3 cards. If that player doesn't, put the top 3 cards of your library into your graveyard. Then Combustible Gearhulk deals damage to that player equal to the total converted mana cost of those cards. So, either you're going to be drawing 3 cards or Combustible Gearhulk is going to be dealing a ton of damage, and with Larg, we're going to be able to do this over and over again, which is amazing. Next, we have Hellkite Charger, 4 and 2 red for a 5/5 dragon with haste and flying, and whenever Hellkite Charger attacks, you may pay 5 and 2 red if you do untap all attacking creatures, and after this phase, there is an additional combat phase. Yeah, and obviously that synergizes really well with Larg because he only gets a trigger on attack. Next, we have Atali Primal Storm, 4 and 2 red for a 6/6 Elder Dinosaur. Whenever Atali the Primal Storm attacks, exile the top card of each player's library. Then you may cast any number of non-land cards exiled this way without paying their mana costs. So, no, you do not get this trigger when you bring out Atali with Larg, but Atali is just a really great creature, so how could I not include her in the deck, of course. She is just so awesome. And like I said, we do have multiple ways to give our creatures haste, so, having Atali in the deck, I think is just really important. It's just one of the best mono red card advantage spells in the game, but no. if you bring it out with Larg, you don't get the trigger because attack triggers only happen when you declare them as an attacker, not when they're brought into the battlefield tapped and attacking. So in order for a Tali to trigger, you have to have her on the battlefield and declare her as an attacker. You can't cheat her out. Next we have Godo, Bandit Warlord, 5 and a red for a 3/3 human barbarian, and when Godo enters the battlefield, you may search your library for an equipment card and put it onto the battlefield. If you do, shuffle your library. Whenever Godo attacks for the first time each turn, untap it and all samurai you control. After this phase, there's an additional combat phase. So, Godo gives us a free equipment onto the battlefield, and it gives us an extra combat phase. Unfortunately, that won't work too well with Larg unless Larg has Vigilance or something like that, because Larg isn't a samurai, so he won't untap. But more importantly, Godo is here to tutor up some of our equipment, of which we have a few that are really important. Next we have Hellkite Tyrant. 4 and 2 red for a 6/5 dragon with flying and trample. Whenever Hellkite Tyrant deals combat damage to a player, gain control of all artifacts that player controls. At the beginning of your upkeep, if you control 20 or more artifacts, you win the game. Pretty sweet. Not a whole lot to say about this that I haven't said before, except it's just another huge creature that deals tons of damage and steals our opponent's artifacts and potentially just wins us the game. Yeah, pretty excellent win con right there. Next we have Steel Hellkite, 6 mana for a 5/5 dragon with flying. It's an artifact, and you can pay 2 mana to give it fire breathing, and you can pay X to destroy each non-land permanent with converted mana cost X, whose controller was dealt combat damage by Steel Hellkite this turn. Activate this ability only once each turn. So this is really important kind of for any mono red deck to help deal with enchantments, because outside of Chaos Warp and a couple of other things, like a Warp World or whatever those dumb spells are, red really has almost no ways to deal with enchantments and things like that, so having these colorless outages are really important. And Steel Hellkite is just one of the best, being a 5/5 flyer, you know, that can basically pick and choose what non-land permanents we want to destroy of our opponents is great. And by the way, you can always choose 0 to blow up all of your opponents' tokens, right? Because tokens are all converted mana cost 0. Moving along, we got Dragon Mage, 5 and 2 red for a 5/5 dragon wizard with flying. Whenever Dragon Mage deals combat damage to a player, each player discards his or her hand and then draws 7 cards. Not bad. Next we have Null Spine Dragon, 5 and 2 red for a 7/5 dragon. When Null Spine Dragon comes into play, you may discard your hand and draw cards equal to the damage dealt to target opponent this turn. So, Null Spine Dragon is actually more in here to be cast from your hand, because, you know, we're usually dealing damage in this deck through combat, and so we don't want to necessarily cheat this in the battlefield. But what's great is that we can, because, like I said before, Larg's ability is free. So there's almost no reason not to, because we're also just going to get it back to our hand anyway. So we can always end up hard casting it later on another turn after the combat phase. And until then, we can just, you know, cheat it out with Larg and just getting some 7 damage flying, no problem. But again, for its ability to happen, the opponent has to have already taken damage somehow. So you can't, like, have this come out and then deal combat damage and then say you're going to draw a bunch of cards. It doesn't work like that. But yeah, these two are great dragons for drawing cards, absolutely. Next we have Tyrant of Discord, 4 and 3 red for a 7/7 elemental, and when Tyrant of Discord enters the battlefield, target opponent chooses a permanent he or she controls at random and sacrifices it. If a non-land permanent is sacrificed this way, repeat this process. Yeah, so basically, they have to sacrifice a land. If they don't sacrifice a land, well, they're going to have to keep on sacrificing things. So why wouldn't they just choose a land right away? Anyway, when this enters the battlefield, target opponent sacrifices a land. Pretty sweet. Next we have Angrath's Marauders, 5 and 2 red for a 4/4 human pirate. If a source you control would deal damage to a permanent or player, it deals double that damage to that permanent or player instead. Yeah, pretty sweet. Just having double damage happening whenever we want with Larg is excellent. And I just mean, you know, on whatever combat phase we choose, we can get out Angrath's Marauders with Larg and suddenly be dealing double combat damage that turn. So pretty excellent, repeatable effect. I just realized the downside of Tyrant of Discord, which is, you know, if your opponent is playing a graveyard deck, you know, they might choose specific creatures to have die and have those death triggers going off. But most of the time, they're just going to be choosing a land with Tyrant of Discord. Moving along, we have Balefire Dragon, 5 and 2 red for a 6/6 dragon with flying, and when Balefire Dragon deals combat damage to a player, it deals that much damage to each creature that player controls. So Balefire Dragon is a board wipe on a stick. It kills our opponents' creatures, almost all of them. It's pretty rare that our opponents have lots of creatures with toughness more than 6. So yeah, Balefire Dragon is definitely almost always just a total board wipe, one-sided. Next we have Meteor Golem, 7 mana for a 3/3 golem, and when it enters the battlefield, destroy target non-land permanent an opponent controls. Again, you know, red has trouble dealing with enchantments, so it helps us deal with enchantments, but more importantly, this can hit pretty much anything, and with Larg, it's, again, happening for free. We're not paying 7 mana. We're just getting Meteor Golem onto the battlefield for free and destroying whatever we want. That is excellent synergy there. Next we have Skyline Despot, 5 and 2 red for a 5/5 flying dragon. When it enters the battlefield, you become the Monarch, and at the beginning of your upkeep, if you're the Monarch, you get a 5/5 red dragon creature token with flying on the battlefield. Yeah, so the Monarch means if you're the Monarch, at the beginning of your end step, you get to draw a card, and if someone else deals combat damage to you, they become the Monarch. So the Monarch is a really cool mechanic that can be introduced into any format of Magic the Gathering as long as you have a card such as Skyline Despot that has the Monarch mechanic printed on it. And it's just a nice little form of card advantage, but also with Larg, you know, you're able to become the Monarch again and again by having Skyline Despot repeatedly enter the battlefield. Next we have Bedlam Reveler, which is 6 and 2 red for a 3/4 Devil Horror. Bedlam Reveler costs 1 less to cast for each instant and sorcery card in your graveyard, and it has prowess, so whenever you cast a non-creature spell, this creature gets +1/+1 until the end of the turn. And finally, when Bedlam Reveler enters the battlefield, discard your hand, and then you draw 3 cards. So when you're down to 0 cards in your hand, obviously this is huge. You're just drawing 3 cards for free. If you don't like the cards in your hand, then that's fine as well. You just get to discard the cards you don't like and draw 3 cards. And so with Larg the Raze Boar, you get to do this over and over again. Next we have our 2 dragon all-stars of the deck, Udvara Hellkite and Lathlis Dragon Queen. Udvara Hellkite is 6 and 2 red for a 6/6 flying dragon, and it says whenever a dragon you control attacks, create a 6/6 red dragon creature token with flying. So that doesn't say a non-token dragon you control attacks, so even the 6/6 dragon creature tokens, whenever they attack, you're going to be getting more dragons. And Lathlis Dragon Queen says, for 4 and 2 red, you get a 6/6 flying dragon, and whenever another non-token dragon enters the battlefield under your control, you may create a 5/5 red dragon creature token with flying, and for 1 and a red, dragons you control get +1/+0 until the end of the turn. So Udvara and Lathlis are just repeatable ways to get out dragons, and they just go in any deck that has dragons. You put these 2 cards in them, absolutely. Udvara Hellkite, remember that his trigger isn't going to go off when the dragon is brought in with Larg's ability, so Udvara doesn't synergize with Larg himself, but other dragons do, so we have Udvara because Udvara synergizes with them. Lathlis Dragon Queen, she is just fabulous with any dragon deck, absolutely. So moving on to the non-creature spells, We got some draw card spells, starting with Faithless Looting. 1 red for a sorcery, you draw 2 cards, and then discard 2 cards, and it has flashback for 2 and a red, so you may cast this card from your graveyard for its flashback cost and then exile it. Pretty sweet value in any red deck. Next we have Outpost Siege, 3 and a red for an enchantment that says as it enters the battlefield, you choose cons or dragons. If you chose cons at the beginning of your upkeep, you exile the top card of your library, and until the end of the turn, you may play that card. If you chose dragons, however, whenever a creature you control leaves the battlefield, Outpost Siege deals 1 damage to target creature or player. So if you already have good enough card advantage going, you might choose dragons with this deck, because we do have a lot of leave the battlefield things that are going to happen, because lots of times the creatures are going to be returning to our hand, right? So Outpost Siege actually works really well with Larg. Next we have Cathartic Reunion, just more draw, 1 and a red for a sorcery. As an additional cost to cast Cathartic Reunion, you gotta discard 2 cards, and then you're drawing 3 cards. So basically you're discarding 3 cards to draw 3 cards with Cathartic Reunion, just a little bit of a filtering. Next we have Staff of Nin, 6 mana for an artifact that says at the beginning of your upkeep, you get to draw an extra card. And you can tap it to have it deal 1 damage to any target. Pretty sweet. Next we have Alhammerit's Archive, 5 mana for a legendary artifact. If you would gain life, you gain twice that much life instead, and if you would draw a card other than the first one you draw in each of your draw steps, you draw 2 cards instead. So really great with our looting effects, like Faithless Looting, you know, with the drawing cards. Instead of drawing 2, we're drawing 4, and then discarding 2. We have lots of ways to draw cards in this deck, actually. A ton of ways. You know, if you look at the creatures, there's Neheb, and there's lots of dragons that draw us cards. So, yeah, there are lots of ways that this can double our card draw, which is really great. Also, we do have a few ways to gain life, and so that's pretty cool too. Next, we have Sarkhan Fireblood, 1 and 2 red for a legendary planeswalker that enters with 3 loyalty counters. For +1, you may discard a card if you do draw a card. So if you have Alhammerit's Archive out, instead you're going to be discarding a card and then drawing 2 cards. Pretty sweet. The next +1 is you can add 2 mana in any combination of colors, spend this mana only to cast dragon spells, which we have plenty of in the deck. And finally, -7, create 4 5/5 red dragon creature tokens with flying. Yeah, pretty awesome. Next we have our other 2 planeswalkers, Chandra, Torch of Defiance, and Koth of the Hammer. So Chandra, Torch of Defiance, is 2 and 2 red for a planeswalker that enters with 4 loyalty counters. For +1, you can exile the top card of your library. You may cast that card. If you don't, Chandra deals 2 damage to each opponent. Her next +1 is you add 2 red mana to your mana pool. Next she has -3, Chandra deals 4 damage to target creature. And finally, -7, you get an emblem with, whenever you cast a spell, this emblem deals 5 damage to any target. So yeah, Chandra, Torch of Defiance, is mostly in here for that card advantage. Also helps out though with removal, also helps out with ramp. I mean, yeah, everything in one. Pretty great. Next we have Koth of the Hammer, 2 and 2 red for a planeswalker that enters with 3 loyalty counters. For +1, you can untap target mountain. It becomes a 4/4 red elemental creature until the end of the turn. That's still a land. -2, you add 1 red mana to your mana pool for each mountain you control. And for -5, you get an emblem with mountains you control have tapped. This land deals 1 damage to target creature or player. So mostly, Koth is in here for that late game -2 effect, when we have a bunch of mountains on the battlefield, and then we just -2 and add 20 mana to our mana pool, something like that, you know. That's pretty awesome. Also, all by, you know, his first effect kind of effectively makes him 1 cheaper to cast. You know, you're tapping 4 to cast him, but then you get to untap target mountain, so, you know, it's as though you only paid 3 to cast him. It's pretty sweet. Yeah. Next we got our kind of control-y spells, Reverberate and Red Elemental Blast. So Reverberate is 2 red for an instant. You copy target instant or sorcery spell and choose new targets for the copy. Pretty sweet. If someone's casting, say, a take extra turn spell, you get to take an extra turn as well. If they're ramping, you get to ramp. If they're drawing cards, you get to draw cards. Another really important reason this is in the deck is to counter spells. If they're casting a counter spell on one of your things, you can cast Reverberate, copy the counter spell, and counter the counter spell. Next is Red Elemental Blast. 1 red for an instant. Choose one. Counter target blue spell or destroy target blue permanent. And mostly this is in here, again, to counter blue counter spells. But, potentially our opponents might have, if they're playing blue whatsoever, then they're going to have a blue commander, and this is going to kill that commander for just 1 red mana. Next we have our life gain equipment. Basilisk Collar is 1 for a equipment with equip 2, and it says equipped creature has death touch and lifelink. So doesn't sound that huge, but we just need some ways to gain life in this deck because we're probably going to get hated on pretty hard, and we want to just be able to stabilize a little bit, stay ahead of the game, so we want to be gaining some life. And if we have I'll Hammer its Archive out, we're going to be gaining twice that life. Next we have Batterskull, 5 mana for an equipment that has equipped for 5, so in total 10 mana to get this onto your creature. It has Living Weapon though, so when this enters the battlefield, you put a 0/0 Black Germ creature token onto the battlefield and then attach this to it. So actually, you don't have to equip this onto a creature because it already enters equipped to the germ. And the equipped creature gets +4/+4 and has Vigilance and Lifelink, and you can pay 3 mana to return Batterskull to its owner's hand. So again, this is mostly in here for the lifelink. We just want to be gaining some life and doubling it, hopefully, with I'll Hammer its Archive. Next we have our 2 ways to protect Ilharg, the Raze Boar. We want to protect him. So we have Swiftfoot Boots and Lightning Greaves, and we also want to give him haste. So Swiftfoot Boots, 2 mana for an equipment, equip 1. Equipped creature has hexproof and haste. Excellent. Lightning Greaves, 2 mana for an equipment with equip 0. Equipped creature has haste and shroud. Excellent choices for any commander deck. Next we have our removal spells. Anger of the Gods is 1 and 2 red for a sorcery. Anger of the Gods deals 3 damage to each creature. If a creature dealt damage this way would die this turn, exile it instead. Remember when I showed you that card Anarchist? Well, this is one of those sorceries you might be wanting to get from your graveyard over and over again. Next we have Burn Away, which is an instant for 4 and a red. It deals 6 damage to target creature. When that creature dies this turn, exile all cards from its controller's graveyard. So if you're playing something like, the Locust God or the Scorpion God, then you can use Burn Away, destroy them, they hit the graveyard, and then you exile the graveyard, and then they don't get to go back to their owner's hand at the end step. So, gets around those cards. Also, just a great way of kind of dealing, kind of killing any creature. I mean, it's pretty rare that there's creatures out there with toughness greater than 6. So you're dealing with any creature and their owner's graveyard in one card. Pretty sweet. I put it in a lot of red decks, actually. Next, we have Sarkhan's Unsealing, 3 in a red for an enchantment that basically turns all of your creatures into board wipes when you cast them from your can. So even though the main theme of this deck is cheating out the creatures with Larg, very often, of course, we are going to be casting creatures. It's not like we're not going to be casting creatures, because we can only cheat out 1 creature a turn with Larg. So, we're definitely going to be casting a lot of creatures. So, Sarkhan's Unsealing says, whenever you cast a creature spell with power 4, 5, or 6, Sarkhan's Unsealing deals 4 damage to any target. Sweet. And then it says, whenever you cast a creature spell with power 7 or greater, Sarkhan's Unsealing deals 4 damage to each opponent and each creature and planeswalker they control. Yeah, that is awesome. It's just a board wipe right there. How many creatures do we have in the deck with power 7 or greater? Well, let's see. There's at least 1, 2, 3. I don't know, like 2 or 3 at least. So that's pretty sweet. We could put more. Next, we have Nevernal's Disc, 4 mana for an artifact that enters the battlefield tapped. And you can pay 1 and tap it to destroy all artifacts, creatures, and enchantments. So just a nice way for red to have a way to totally board wipe and get rid of enchantments. Sometimes you just need to get rid of all non-land permanents. So this is a must-have in a lot of decks. And if you're just way behind, this is what you got to do. Next, we got Vandal Blast. 1 red for a sorcery, destroy target artifact you don't control, or you can overload it for 5 mana, so you can pay 4 and a red, and you can change the text of the card to say, destroy each artifact you don't control. So it's just a one-sided board wipe with artifacts. Pretty excellent in any commander deck. Next, we have Chaos Warp. 2 and a red for an instant. The owner of target permanent shuffles it into their library, then reveals the top card of their library. If it's a permanent card, they put it onto the battlefield. So this is our one way of literally dealing with any permanent, land, enchantment, artifact, creature, planeswalker, whatever we want. We get to shuffle it back into its owner's library. And in a format where we're playing with 100 card decks, the odds that they're going to reveal that exact permanent are really low. And personally, I've never really seen them reveal something so busted as whatever I Chaos Warped. So make sure when you use Chaos Warp, you're Chaos Warping something really important, Next, we have Blasphemous Act. 8 and a red for a sorcery. This spell costs 1 less to cast for each creature on the battlefield, so potentially it costs only 1 red mana. Almost every time I cast this, it only costs 1 red mana. And Blasphemous Act deals 13 damage to each creature. Yeah, 13 damage. Pretty much kills every creature on the battlefield. Yeah, always. Next, we have Comet Storm. X and 2 red for an instant with multi-kicker, so you may pay an additional 1 mana any number of times as you cast this spell. Choose target creature or player, then choose another target creature or player for each time Comet Storm was kicked. Comet Storm deals X damage to each of them. So if you have enough mana, Comet Storm can just end the game. Let's say, for example, you're playing a game of Commander, each of your opponents has 10 life, and you want to kill them all with Comet Storm. Okay, so you got to pay 10 into X, then you got to pay for the 2 red, and that deals 10 damage to one opponent, and then you got to pay the multi-kicker cost 2 times because there's 2 more opponents to target. So in total, you're going to be paying 14 mana to deal 10 damage to each opponent with Comet Storm in a 4-player game. That's how Comet Storm works. So if you have enough mana, this can definitely end the game, especially with things like Neheb and Perforos out. You can get so much mana and just pump it all into Comet Storm and just win the game. And then we have Subterranean Tremors, our last removal spell. So X and a red for a sorcery. Another sorcery we might get out with Anarchist multiple times. Subterranean Tremors deals X damage to each creature without flying. If X is 4 or more, destroy all artifacts. If X is 8 or more, put an 8/8 red lizard creature token onto the battlefield. Yeah, so what's really great about Subterranean Tremors is it doesn't say it deals the damage to each player, and that is really huge because when you play things like Earthquake, oftentimes you're going to die as well because you're just killing everybody with Earthquake. But at least with Subterranean Tremors, it's only hitting the creatures on the battlefield and potentially destroying all artifacts as well. So that's pretty sweet, but not killing all players. Next we have our ramp spells, starting with Soul Ring. Then we have Expedition Map, 1 mana for an artifact with which you can pay 2 and tap it and sacrifice it and search your library for a land card, reveal it and put it into your hand, and then shuffle your library. Notice it doesn't say basic land cards, so Expedition Map will get you any land you want, and once we get to the lands, you'll see there are some utility lands that are really important. Next we have Ruby Medallion. 2 mana for a red for an artifact that says red spells you cast cost 1 less to cast. Every single red spell. So that can net you actually a ton of mana over the course of 1 turn. Like let's say you cast 3 different red spells. Right there you've just saved 3 mana with Ruby Medallion. Pretty sweet value for only 2 mana. Next we have Thematic Compass, which is an artifact that says you can pay 3 mana and tap it to search your library for a basic land card, reveal it and put it into your hand, and then shuffle your library. At the beginning of your end step, if you control 7 or more lands, you transform Thematic Compass into Spires of Orazca, a land that taps for a colorless mana, or you can tap it to untap target attacking creature an opponent controls and remove it from combat, so it becomes a Maze of Ith. So Thematic Compass is just really great at ramping early game and really great at protecting you late game, which is just what we need in this deck because, late game we're probably going to be getting hated out, so we want to be removing our opponent's big creatures from combat for sure. Next we have Fire Diamond, 2 mana for an artifact that enters tapped, and it taps to add a red mana to our mana pool. Sweet. Then we have Extra Planar Lens, 3 mana for an artifact with imprint, so when it enters the battlefield, you may remove target land you control from the game. The removed card is imprinted on this artifact. So whenever a land with the same name as the imprinted card is tapped for mana, its controller adds 1 mana to his or her mana pool of any type that land produced. So basically with this deck we're going to be exiling a mountain, and then for all players, all mountains tap to add 2 red mana, which is pretty excellent. If you can afford to buy the snow-covered mountains, then it will only be players that control snow-covered mountains that get to tap their snow-covered mountains for 2 extra mana. But if you can't afford that, then just get normal mountains. Basically, what you need to do as a commander player is buy at least 1 copy of Extra Planar Lens, which you can, move back and forth between all of your mono-colored decks, because it is basically the ultimate mono-colored deck card. Just doubling all of your mana is excellent. And, of course, if you can afford to also buy all of the snow-covered lands, then it's only you who's getting that advantage, and that's pretty awesome. Moving along, we got Gilded Lotus, 5 mana for an artifact that taps to add 3 mana of any one color. Excellent. Then we have Brass's Bounty, 6 and a red for a sorcery. For each land you control, create a colorless treasure artifact token with tap and sacrifice this artifact, add 1 mana of any color to your mana pool. Another great choice for Anarchist to be continually getting back from our graveyard. Next, we have our lands. Yep, that's it. So we are at the lands, of which we have 38 total. And now I'm thinking we should put High Market in because, we need more sack outlets. So probably should put High Market in here and go down to 28 mountains. But anyway, so we got Homeward Path, which is a land that taps to add a colorless mana to our mana pool. And we can tap it to have each player gain control of all creatures he or she owns. So if anybody's trying to gain control of our creatures, we can gain control of them back with Homeward Path. But this is also in here because, like I said, we have a lack of sacrifice outlets. So one of the reasons we use sacrifice outlets is to prevent people from gaining control of our creatures. So, this kind of works as our, negator of that. But also, if we put High Market in here, it's just a land that is also a sack outlet. Not a bad idea. Next we have Reliquary Tower, which is a land that just says we have no maximum hand size, and it taps to add a colorless mana to our mana pool. Really important when you have Ilharg's Archive. Then we have Temple of the False God, which taps to add 2 colorless mana to your mana pool. Activate this ability only if you control 5 or more lands. So in a format like Commander, which is a long game format, we plan on playing for a long time. If you don't eventually have 5 or more lands, then you're just losing the game anyway. So I think Temple of the False God is really great. I have never had it fail me personally. I mean, I'm sure one day it will, but at that point anyway, I'm already, down on lands so hard I'd probably be losing the game anyway, and it wouldn't have helped me much if it was just a normal land. So I think Temple of the False God is definitely worth trying out in any Commander deck, because you will eventually get those 5 lands in our long game format, and it will tap for 2 mana. That's pretty awesome. Next we have Gyre Reach Sanitarium, a legendary land that taps to add a colorless mana to your mana pool, where you can pay 2 and tap it to have each player draw a card and then discard a card. Pretty excellent. Also really great with Ilharg's Archive. Next we have Forgotten Cave, Desert of the Fervent, and Smoldering Crater, which are our cycling lands. And so cycling means you can pay the cycling cost to discard the card and then draw a card. And this is just really great to have on lands because sometimes you're mana flooded as opposed to mana screwed. And so in those situations, you want to be able to cycle the lands away because you already have too many lands. So you cycle them away so you can draw another card. So Forgotten Cave enters tapped. It taps to add a red, and you can cycle it away for 1 red. Desert of the Fervent, enters tapped, taps to add a red, or you can cycle it away for 1 and a red. Smoldering Crater enters tapped, taps to add a red, and you can cycle it away for 2 mana. Dormant Volcano enters the battlefield tapped. When it enters the battlefield, sacrifice it unless you return an untapped mountain you control to its owner's hand. And Dormant Volcano taps to add both a colorless and a red mana to your mana pool. So, like Temple of the False God, Dormant Volcano is going to add 2 mana to your mana pool on 1 land. There is the downside, you have to return an untapped mountain you control to your hand. Now, this might sound really bad, but hey, give me a moment here, I'll explain. All right, if you think about a card such as Farseek, a green spell that is 2 mana to cast to put a land on the battlefield. Well, that is almost what you are doing here. You're using 2 lands to net yourself an extra land on the battlefield, but more specifically, you're netting an extra land drop. Basically, these are 2 land drops in one, which is also really important in Commander. So you are returning a land to your hand that's using 1 land, and then this is entering tap, so you're using 2 lands to end up getting 1 extra land on the battlefield. Well, that's almost the exact same thing as Farseek, or, spells like that, except you're not actually using a spell to do it, you're just playing a land. So I think that's pretty awesome, and they do work pretty well in Commander, so give them a shot. I don't think you'll be disappointed. Finally, we got Flamekin Village, which is a land that enters the battlefield tapped unless you reveal an elemental card from your hand. So we don't have any elementals in the deck. Oh, we do actually have 1 elemental in the deck, I think. Let me take a look here real quick. We do, I think. Or is it just an incarnation? No, we do. Tyrant of Discord is totally an elemental. Sweet. So we can reveal Tyrant of Discord to have Flamekin Village enter untapped. Anyway, Flamekin Village taps to add a red, or you can pay a red and tap it to give target creature haste until the end of the turn, which, as you know, with Larg is really important to give him haste so he can attack right away and get that attack trigger right away. Finally, we have 29 mountains, and that's Larg, the Raze Boar. So let me know what you think. Leave comments in the comments below. Please like and subscribe. I really appreciate it. This is Eric from Bane Alley Magic signing off. Until next time, take care, take it easy.